You need to step away from that vehicle right now. Excuse me? This is my car. Ma'am, we received a report of someone suspicious loading items into a vehicle at this address. I live here. I'm loading groceries into my own car in my own driveway. I need to see some identification. Now. Officer, I just told you this is my house. I'm Judge Patricia Lawson. I've lived here for 12 years. I don't care if you're the governor. Show me your ID or you're coming with me. Officer Marcus Webb had been with the Atlanta Police Department for 6 years when he walked into a situation that would destroy his career and cost the city $3.8 million. He was 29 years old, young enough that he should have questioned his instincts, but apparently convinced that his authority made him infallible. One Saturday afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood, he responded to a call about a suspicious person loading items into a vehicle. The suspicious person was Judge Patricia Lawson, a federal district court judge with 23 years on the bench, putting her own groceries into her trunk after returning from the supermarket. What Webb did next, ignoring her explanations, dismissing her credentials, and detaining her in her own driveway while neighbors watched, would become a case study in how racial bias overrides reason and destroys careers. Before we get into what happened next, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Every subscription helps us continue exposing these patterns of injustice. A black woman in her mid-50s, Judge Patricia Lawson, was standing at the rear of her silver Lexus sedan in the driveway of her two-story colonial home on a quiet Saturday afternoon. Her car keys were in her hand. 4 reusable grocery bags sat in her trunk alongside a case of bottled water. No crime, no trespassing, no suspicious activity, just a federal judge unloading groceries at her own house. But Officer Marcus Webb saw her through a filter so distorted by assumptions about who belongs in expensive neighborhoods that he could not process a black woman as a legitimate homeowner, let alone one of the most powerful legal figures in the state. The Lawson residence sits on Maple Ridge Drive in Buckhead, one of Atlanta's most affluent neighborhoods. The street curves gently through an area known for its manicured lawns, mature oak trees, and homes valued well into 7 figures. Judge Lawson's house, a traditional colonial with white columns and dark green shutters, sits on a half-acre lot at the end of a cul-de-sac. The neighborhood is the kind of place where people know their neighbors, where children ride bikes on summer evenings, where nothing dramatic typically happens. It was 2:30 in the afternoon on a Saturday in late April. The weather was perfect, 72 degrees with a light breeze. Several neighbors were outside working in their yards. The sound of a lawnmower hummed from 2 houses down. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees lining the street. It was the kind of peaceful suburban Saturday where the most exciting event should have been someone washing their car. Judge Patricia Lawson had been a federal district court judge for the Northern District of Georgia for 23 years. 23 years, presiding over cases that shaped law and affected lives. She had handled complex civil litigation, criminal trials, constitutional challenges, and high-profile cases that made national news. She had sentenced drug kingpins, ruled on corporate fraud cases worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and written opinions that were cited by appellate courts across the country. Before her appointment to the federal bench, she had spent 8 years as a state superior court judge, and 6 years before that as an assistant district attorney in Fulton County, where she had prosecuted everything from armed robbery to murder. Her colleagues called her brilliant. The attorneys who practiced before her called her fair, but demanding. The defendants who appeared in her courtroom learned quickly that Judge Lawson had no patience for games, no tolerance for dishonesty, and an encyclopedic knowledge of case law that made arguing before her both terrifying and educational. Judge Lawson had graduated from Spelman College, then earned her law degree from Yale Law School, where she had been an editor of the Yale Law Journal. She had clerked for a federal appellate judge, worked at one of Atlanta's most prestigious law firms, and been recruited into the district attorney's office specifically because of her reputation for thorough preparation and courtroom skill. At 54 years old, Patricia Lawson was exactly where decades of work had brought her. She had a career that commanded respect, a reputation that opened doors, and the kind of authority that made attorneys nervous when they walked into her courtroom. But on this particular Saturday, Judge Lawson was not thinking about case law or sentencing guidelines or the motion she needed to review before Monday morning. She was thinking about the fact that she had finally made it to the grocery store after putting it off all week, that she needed to get the frozen items into the freezer before they thawed, and that she was looking forward to a quiet evening at home with her husband after a long week of hearings and trials. She had left the house at 1:15, driven to the Whole Foods 3 miles away, spent 45 minutes shopping, and returned home at 2:20. She had parked in her driveway, opened the trunk, and begun transferring bags from the shopping cart to the car. She wore jeans, a pale blue cotton shirt, and comfortable flats. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked like what she was, a professional woman running weekend errands. She had done nothing to attract attention. She had violated no law, disturbed no one, and given no one any reason to question her presence in her own driveway. But to one person watching from across the street, Patricia Lawson's presence in this neighborhood was something that needed to be investigated, and that person had decided to call the police. Claire Hoffman was 68 years old. She had lived on Maple Ridge Drive for 34 years, long before the neighborhood became as expensive as it was now, and she had watched with growing concern as the area changed. She considered herself the unofficial neighborhood watch, the person who kept an eye on things, who noticed when something seemed out of place. And that Saturday afternoon, looking out her front window, Claire Hoffman had noticed something that made her uncomfortable. A black woman loading items into a car parked in Judge Lawson's driveway. Hoffman knew Judge Lawson by sight, had seen her coming and going over the years, but she had never really spoken to her beyond polite waves. And somehow, in that moment, despite having seen Judge Lawson countless times, Hoffman convinced herself that this woman loading groceries into a car could not possibly be the homeowner. The logic was tortured and racist, but it made sense to Hoffman. Maybe the judge was away. Maybe this was a housekeeper who had decided to steal something. Maybe this was someone taking advantage of an empty house. Hoffman watched for 5 minutes, trying to decide what to do. Then she picked up her phone and called 911. Officer Marcus Webb had been with the Atlanta Police Department for 6 years. In those 6 years, he had compiled a record that should have raised serious concerns at every level of supervision. 9 complaints. 9. 7 of them involved allegations of racial profiling, excessive force, or unlawful detention of black residents in predominantly white areas. 2 had been sustained, resulting in written reprimands and mandatory diversity training that Webb attended, but apparently never internalized. The other 7 had been closed with findings of insufficient evidence, despite witness statements and documented patterns. Webb had a clear and documented pattern. He responded to calls in affluent neighborhoods with an assumption that black people did not belong there, unless they were service workers or delivery drivers. A black man jogging through Brookhaven had been stopped and questioned for 20 minutes about where he lived and where he was going. A black family having a picnic in Piedmont Park had been asked to show proof that they had reserved the pavilion, even though reservations were not required. A black teenager walking home from school through a wealthy neighborhood had been detained and searched because Webb decided he looked suspicious. The pattern was obvious. The documentation was extensive, but somehow Webb remained on patrol, his supervisors noting in evaluations that he was proactive but needed to work on. Community engagement and cultural sensitivity. Those notes never translated into consequences that changed his behavior. When Webb received the call about a suspicious person at the Maple Ridge address, his mind immediately constructed a narrative. Suspicious person in Buckhead. Probably a burglary in progress. Probably someone who does not belong there. He arrived at Maple Ridge Drive at 2:28, parking his patrol car at the curb in front of the Lawson residence. He got out, adjusting his duty belt, and immediately assessed the scene. He saw a black woman standing at the trunk of a Lexus loading bags. He saw expensive homes, manicured lawns, the kind of neighborhood where people had money, and expected police to respond quickly when they called about suspicious activity. In Webb's mind, the call made perfect sense. This woman did not fit. She had to be the problem. He walked directly toward her. Do you think neighbors should face consequences for calling police on homeowners based on racial assumptions? Drop your answer below. Judge Lawson was reaching into the trunk for the last grocery bag when she became aware of someone approaching behind her. She turned and saw a police officer walking up her driveway with purpose, his hand resting on his duty belt, his expression set in what she recognized immediately as suspicion. You need to step away from that vehicle right now. Judge Lawson straightened, confused. Excuse me, this is my car. Ma'am, we received a report of someone suspicious loading items into a vehicle at this address. I need to see some identification. Judge Lawson felt a familiar sensation, something she had experienced too many times in her life, despite her credentials, despite her career, despite everything she had achieved. The realization that to this officer, in this moment, she was not a federal judge. She was a black woman in a place where someone had decided she did not belong. Officer, I live here. This is my house. I'm loading groceries into my own car in my own driveway. Webb's expression did not change. I need to see some identification now. Judge Lawson set down the grocery bag. My identification is inside my house. I'm Judge Patricia Lawson. I'm a federal district court judge, and I've lived at this address for 12 years. Webb's jaw tightened. Ma'am, I don't care if you're the governor. You need to show me identification, or you're coming with me for questioning. Judge Lawson felt her professional composure being tested. She had spent decades in courtrooms maintaining calm in the face of hostility, controlling her reactions even when attorneys or defendants said outrageous things. But this was different. This was her home. This was her driveway. This was her car, her groceries, her Saturday afternoon. Officer, my name is Patricia Lawson. You can verify that with one phone call to your supervisor. You can look up this address and see that it has been registered to me for over a decade. You can see my mail on the front porch. You can see that everything about this situation indicates that I am exactly who I say I am and exactly where I belong. Show me identification or put your hands behind your back. This is where bias becomes impenetrable. Officer Webb had responded to a call about a suspicious black woman in an affluent neighborhood. When he arrived, he saw a black woman in an affluent neighborhood. In his mind, that confirmed the complaint. Every piece of evidence after that, the groceries, the Lexus, the calm explanation, the judicial title, was filtered through his initial assumption. He was not looking at a federal judge. He was looking at someone who must be lying, someone who must have stolen the car, someone who was exactly what the caller had reported, because why else would someone have called? Should officers be required to verify home ownership before detaining residents in non-emergency situations? Let me know what you think. The confrontation had attracted attention. Two neighbors who had been working in their yards had stopped and were watching. A woman walking her dog had paused on the sidewalk. Judge Lawson was acutely aware that this scene was playing out in front of people she saw regularly, people who would now have witnessed her being treated like a criminal in her own driveway. Officer, I am going to comply with your instructions because I understand how these situations can escalate. But I want you to know that you are making a serious mistake. I am a federal judge. My credentials are in my purse, which is in my car. I am going to retrieve them slowly and show them to you, and then you are going to apologize and leave. Webb's hand moved closer to his weapon. Do not reach for anything without my permission. Step away from the vehicle. Judge Lawson stepped back, her hands visible. Officer, my purse is in the front seat of the car. May I retrieve it to show you my identification? Webb moved forward, positioning himself between Judge Lawson and the car. You stay right there. I will retrieve the purse. He opened the driver's side door and saw a leather handbag on the passenger seat. He pulled it out, unzipped it, and began going through its contents. Judge Lawson watched, her jaw tight, as this officer pawed through her personal belongings in full view of her neighbors. He pulled out her wallet, opened it, and examined her driver's license. The address on the license matched the house. The name on the license was Patricia Lawson. Webb looked at the license, looked at Judge Lawson, looked back at the license. Patricia Lawson. This address. But licenses could be faked. People used stolen identities all the time. Could be fake. Could be stolen. Webb kept searching through the purse. He pulled out a business card holder, opened it, and saw embossed cards that read, Judge Patricia Lawson, United States District Court, Northern District of Georgia. He stared at the cards. Then he pulled out another item, a leather credential case. He opened it and saw a federal judicial identification card with Judge Lawson's photo, her name, her title, and the seal of the United States courts. Webb's face went pale. He looked at the credential, looked at Judge Lawson, looked back at the credential. The neighbors were closer now, clearly watching the interaction. One of them, an older white man, called out, Officer, that's Judge Lawson. She lives there. She has lived there for years. Webb ignored him. He held the credentials but could not seem to process what he was seeing. These could be fake, he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Officer, those are federal credentials. They are not fake. You have my driver's license showing I live at this address. You have my business cards showing my title. You have my judicial credentials. You have a neighbor confirming my identity. At what point does evidence override your initial assumption? Judge Lawson's voice was steady, but there was steel beneath the calm. What she wanted to do was express the fury she felt at being treated this way in her own home. What she needed to do was document everything, stay calm, and build a record. Webb seemed frozen. He had made a choice when he approached. He had assumed criminality. He had assumed this woman did not belong. And now evidence was confronting that assumption, but his mind could not let go of the initial narrative. Ma'am, I am going to need you to wait here while I verify this information. You are detaining me? In my own driveway? While I unload groceries? Yes, ma'am. I need to verify your identity. Judge Lawson looked at the neighbors watching, at the officer holding her credentials, at the absurdity of the situation. Officer, what is your name and badge number? Webb hesitated. Officer Marcus Webb, badge 7439. Thank you, Officer Webb. I want you to understand that I am complying under protest. I am a federal judge being detained without cause while engaging in a lawful activity at my own residence. I am making it clear for everyone present that I believe this detention is unlawful and motivated by racial bias. Please proceed with your verification. Webb pulled out his radio and stepped several feet away. Judge Lawson could hear him speaking quietly to dispatch, asking them to confirm the address registration, asking them to verify judicial credentials. The response came back quickly. The address was registered to Patricia Lawson. Federal judicial credentials could be verified through the U.S. courts. Dispatch asked if Webb wanted them to contact a supervisor. Webb hesitated, then said yes. A supervisor arrived 7 minutes later. Sergeant Denise Martinez was a 16-year veteran who had worked her way up through patrol, internal affairs, and training. She had seen officer mistakes before, but she recognized within seconds that this situation was different. She pulled up to the scene and immediately assessed what she was seeing. An officer holding credentials and a purse. A well-dressed black woman standing with her arms crossed, clearly angry. Neighbors watching, grocery bags visible in a car trunk. Martinez got out of her vehicle and walked over to Webb. What do we have here, Officer Webb? Webb handed her the credentials and explained the situation in a voice that had become defensive. Got a call about a suspicious person loading items into a vehicle. I responded, found this woman, asked for identification. She claims to be a judge. Martinez looked at the credentials, looked at Judge Lawson, looked at the driver's license. Then she looked at Webb with an expression of barely contained frustration. Officer Webb, this is Judge Patricia Lawson. She is a federal district court judge. These are legitimate federal credentials. This is her home. She was loading groceries. Why is she being detained? Webb fumbled for an explanation. The caller said someone suspicious. I was verifying identity. Martinez turned to Judge Lawson. Your Honor, I apologize on behalf of the Atlanta Police Department. This detention was inappropriate and should not have happened. You are free to go, and I will be filing a report on this incident. Judge Lawson nodded, her expression neutral. Sergeant, I appreciate your intervention. However, I want to be clear that I will be filing a formal complaint against Officer Webb. I will also be contacting the police chief, the mayor, and the Department of Justice. This was not a simple mistake. This was racial profiling. This was an unlawful detention. And it happened because Officer Webb made an assumption about who belongs in this neighborhood based on the color of my skin. Martinez turned to Webb, her voice dropping to something cold and final. Give me your badge and weapon. You are on immediate administrative leave, pending investigation. Webb's face went white. Sergeant, I was responding to a call. You detained a federal judge for loading groceries at her own house after she identified herself, showed you her credentials, and had a neighbor vouch for her. You did not verify. You did not de-escalate. You detained. Badge and weapon. Now. Webb unclipped his badge and handed it over, then surrendered his service weapon. For the first time, He seemed to understand the magnitude of his mistake. Sergeant Martinez turned back to Judge Lawson. "Your Honor, is there anything else we can do for you right now?" Judge Lawson picked up her purse, checked that everything was still inside, and looked at both officers. "You can leave my property, and you can tell your chief that I will be in contact with him first thing Monday morning." She turned and walked into her house, leaving the grocery bags in the trunk, no longer interested in unloading them while police were still in her driveway. Should officers face immediate suspension for detaining homeowners without verifying basic information? Drop your answer. Within hours, the story had reached local news outlets. Judge Lawson, after discussing it with her husband and her attorney, had decided to go public immediately. She was not interested in handling this quietly or letting it be swept away with an internal investigation that would result in nothing. She contacted a civil rights attorney she knew, reached out to a journalist at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and prepared a statement. By Sunday morning, the story was everywhere. Federal judge detained at her own home by Atlanta police officer. Black judge stopped while unloading groceries in her driveway. Atlanta officer on leave after wrongful detention of federal judge Patricia Lawson. The coverage was immediate and intense. The Atlanta NAACP issued a statement demanding a full investigation. The Federal Judges Association expressed concern. Civil rights organizations called for Officer Webb's termination and systemic reform. The Atlanta Police Department issued a brief statement saying the matter was under investigation and that Officer Webb had been placed on administrative leave. Officer Marcus Webb's life imploded within 24 hours. His name was public. His history of complaints was pulled and reported by journalists. 9 complaints in 6 years, 7 involving racial profiling allegations. The pattern was obvious, and now it was in headlines across the state. Webb deleted his social media accounts, but screenshots of his posts had already been archived and shared, including several that expressed views about crime and race that made his supervisors cringe. He issued no public statement. His attorney advised him to remain silent. But the damage was done. His career was over, and everyone knew it. Claire Hoffman, the neighbor who had made the call, was identified by other residents and faced her own reckoning. Local news interviewed neighbors who expressed shock and embarrassment. Hoffman gave a brief statement to a reporter. "I thought something looked suspicious. I made a mistake." She tried to apologize to Judge Lawson through a handwritten note delivered to her door, but Judge Lawson did not respond. Hoffman's name became associated with the incident, and she faced social ostracism from neighbors who were appalled by what she had triggered. Judge Lawson filed her lawsuit 3 weeks later. The complaint named Officer Marcus Webb, Sergeant Denise Martinez for failure to adequately supervise, Claire Hoffman for making a racially motivated false report, and the Atlanta Police Department for systemic failure to address a pattern of discriminatory policing. The claims were comprehensive: unlawful detention without reasonable suspicion, violation of Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable seizure, violation of federal civil rights based on racial discrimination, intentional infliction of emotional distress, failure to train and supervise officers with documented histories of racial profiling. The complaint included Webb's complete disciplinary record: 9 complaints over 6 years, 7 involving racial profiling, multiple instances where supervisors had noted problems but taken no meaningful action, all documented, all filed away, all ignored until Webb detained a federal judge in her own driveway. The city's attorneys reviewed the case and reached a swift conclusion. The facts were indefensible. The optics were catastrophic. Judge Lawson had impeccable credentials, a spotless reputation, and the kind of legal expertise that made going to trial against her unthinkable. The city settled within 8 months. The terms included a payment of $3,800,000 to Judge Lawson, mandatory reforms to police training and complaint procedures, the creation of an independent civilian review board with subpoena power, and quarterly reporting on stops and detentions, broken down by race and neighborhood. Judge Lawson donated a significant portion of the settlement to organizations fighting racial profiling and supporting communities affected by discriminatory policing. Officer Marcus Webb was terminated 6 weeks after the incident. The termination letter was direct and damning. Officer Webb detained a federal judge without reasonable suspicion, based solely on a caller's report and his own racial bias. Despite multiple prior complaints and training interventions, Officer Webb demonstrated a continued pattern of discriminatory policing that the department can no longer ignore. His employment is terminated effective immediately. Webb's name was entered into the national database that tracks decertified officers. His law enforcement career ended at 29 years old. He would never wear a badge again. Claire Hoffman faced social consequences that extended beyond embarrassment. Several neighbors stopped speaking to her. She received angry messages and became a symbol of the kind of racial suspicion that turned neighborhoods into surveillance zones for people of color. She eventually sold her house and moved out of the area, unable to recover from the stigma. Judge Patricia Lawson testified at a city council hearing on police reform 6 months after the incident. Her testimony was precise, powerful, and devastating. I am a federal district court judge with 23 years on the bench. I have presided over criminal cases, civil rights cases, and constitutional challenges. I have sentenced defendants, ruled on complex legal issues, and written opinions that have been cited by appellate courts. On the afternoon of April 23rd, I was detained by an Atlanta police officer while unloading groceries in my own driveway. She paused, letting the absurdity sink in. I was not committing a crime. I was not trespassing. I was not doing anything suspicious. I was loading bags of food into my car at my own home. But someone saw me and decided I did not belong. And an officer responded to that assumption without question, without investigation, without basic verification. Another pause, her voice steady but carrying weight that made council members shift uncomfortably. Officer Webb had 9 prior complaints. 7 involved racial profiling. The pattern was documented. The pattern was clear. But the department allowed him to continue patrolling, allowed him to continue stopping people, allowed him to continue acting on bias until he made the catastrophic mistake of detaining someone with the resources and platform to fight back. She looked directly at the police chief. The settlement the city paid me is significant, but money does not undo the humiliation of being treated like a criminal in front of my neighbors. Money does not restore the sense of safety I should feel in my own home. Money does not change the fact that despite my credentials, despite my career, despite everything I have achieved, I was still seen as suspicious because of the color of my skin. Her final statement was a question that hung in the air. If this can happen to a federal judge, what happens to everyone else? What happens to people who do not have law degrees, who do not have powerful positions, who do not have the resources to fight back? How many other people have been detained, arrested, or worse because an officer acted on bias and the department did nothing to stop the pattern? Should documented patterns of racial profiling trigger automatic removal from patrol duty? Drop your answer. This was not just about one afternoon in one driveway. This was about a system that allowed Marcus Webb to accumulate 9 complaints over 6 years while remaining on patrol. This was about a culture that treated each incident in isolation, never connecting the pattern, never acknowledging that repeated behavior reveals character and bias. This was about a neighbor who saw a black woman and assumed criminality, a dispatcher who sent an officer without asking basic questions, and an officer who arrived with his conclusion already formed. Webb's career is over. That is justice. The city paid $3,800,000. That is accountability. The department implemented reforms. That is change. But settlements and terminations and new policies do not undo what happened. They do not erase the memory of standing in your own driveway being treated like a suspect. They do not restore the dignity of having your purse searched in front of your neighbors. They do not change the fact that being black in an affluent neighborhood is still, for too many people, enough to trigger suspicion. The real question is what changes now? Do police departments finally remove officers after 3 complaints instead of 9? Do dispatchers finally ask whether the caller actually witnessed a crime or just saw someone they decided did not belong? Do neighbors finally examine their own biases before picking up the phone? Because if we do not fix the systems that kept Webb on patrol despite 9 complaints, if we do not address the culture that made Hoffman comfortable calling 911 about a woman loading groceries, then we are just waiting for the next officer, the next caller, the next victim, the next headlines. Comment if you believe this should be law. Any officer with 3 or more sustained complaints involving racial profiling or excessive force must be removed from patrol and reassigned or terminated. And if you think these stories matter, if you believe that accountability requires awareness and pressure, if you think we need to keep demanding better from the people we trust with authority, then hit that subscribe button and share this video. We are not stopping. We are going to keep exposing these patterns. We are going to keep telling these stories. We are going to keep fighting for the federal judges, the grocery shoppers, the people unloading their cars in their own driveways, who deserve to live without being criminalized for existing in spaces where someone decided they do not belong. This is not just about one judge or one officer or one neighbor. This is about all of us and the world we choose to accept or the world we choose to change.